Hello again. Welcome back. This is RP Aaron Dowdy, aka RP Grizzly, here for another sermon. It is not Sunday, it is Monday, for I am late once again. You might hear birds in the background because it is a warm but nice day, so I've left the windows open. Actually gives the sermon a nice ambience. Reminds me of my childhood when you would have dogs and cows walking in on the sermon. Or bats, depending on how late the sermon had gone. Outdoor preaching. Gotta love it. However, that's not what we're here for. Thanks for coming in. Hope you are ready for another sermon today. I forget what the date is. It is the 23rd. Today we have a nice word. It's going to seem a little technical to some of you, because I know a lot, especially if you're new to the faith, but it is really important. And I want to explain how it ties into our lives and how the theology will literally shape the way you look at the world, and the philosophy in general will shape your perspective and your lenses of how you view reality, which will shape your decisions and how they are. Which seems really woo for a basic way of saying the general perspective of what people think is will affect what you think the world is. Whether you're more counter to it or more aligned to it, it will color your perspective. For a simple example, slavery comes to mind. Not too many centuries ago, no one would have thought there was a problem with slavery other than the fact that they didn't want to be a slave themselves. Perspectives. It's important. And we, as a people, have perspectives as well that shape the way we view the Bible and the world and how things are. Most of it's been skewed. A lot of it has been peppered and hammered. Many denominations have literally been started by CIA type groups and connection groups and all kinds of things. Catholics have been influenced in Latin America by various communist movements and KGB stuff. I know, crazy, but don't shoot the messenger. I mean, we can go much earlier than that with certain missionaries, working with the British Army and whatnot. It's a thing. You're never going to get completely away from it. But it's important to recognize it and recognize the hand that shaped the modern worldview and that it is not just an organic creation and how that happens. So, yes, this is very much sermon material. How we view the Bible, our modern perspective. We have to remember, as Dr. Heiser's work would help in this perspective, the biblical writers thought differently than we did. Their perspectives were different. Their idioms were different. Their metaphors were different. No one chuckled when said tied an ass to a tree because ass wasn't a bad word to them. That kind of thing. And if you don't know what I'm messing around with, when I was young, we would always get a kick out of the fact that early King James versions would have Moses tying his ass to a tree and walking, I think, 10 miles. Ass being donkey, right? The biblical writers in Hebrew didn't have any innuendo like that. Our perspective, though, makes that line hilarious. Yeah, needless to say, later versions of the Bible took that little bit out or changed the wording. But that's a humorous approach and something we have to remember. We are not Muslims, which may seem out of nowhere, but if you know anything about how Islam works, they don't accept the idea that there was a structural change to the Quran. That the Quran was at one point non-existent, in the sense that it was always God's word to them. It was always Allah's word, and it's never changed. There's no nuance and nothing weird like that. And in fact, Muhammad didn't write it because he was illiterate. And they somehow think this helps their perspective. It's we actually pursue truth. Islam does not pursue truth. They admit this. They are allowed to lie, and in fact, it's a close part of what they are. I forget what surah slash Quran thing it is. It's basically tells them that if you are weak, go ahead and lie. Lie as much as you need to. Pretend to be a Christian, whatever you gotta do to eventually become strong and reconquer the infidel. Islam's perspective. Truth is malleable and not important. Therefore, however, the Quran has to change to push their perspectives and what they want done is allowed. This has particularly been the case of certain uncomfortable surahs and sayings of Muhammad that have come to light over the years that have just magically disappeared because it made Islam look bad. Can't do that anymore with the internet. So if you have a if you are a mature person and can handle it, look up the Al Zut situation in Muhammad. That is, we actually have to pursue truth. From that perspective, it's important to understand the way the actual writers of the book thought when they wrote. They were not 21st, or what are we, 21st century white boys or black boys or Asian boys or any boys of that matter. They were from a much different time with completely different perspectives. And you have to view the Bible from their lens because that's how they were writing it. They would not have any problems with miracles or spirituals stuff connecting everywhere. They don't have the skeptical mind, which seems to only ever be skeptical in one direction. And yeah, I say that because science has become incredibly unreliable. In fact, recent studies, ironically scientific studies, I know, show that over half of any given experiment cannot be replicated in another lab, which is to say it's totally false, and the numbers were doctored. Replication in this case would be the experiment that was supposedly described in the paper cannot be repeated outside of the lab, and this part's rarely repeated because most of these scientific endeavors these days are politically motivated. They're funded by one group or another. That they're pushed for a political reason. They're not because Christianity has been taken out of science. There's no pursuit of truth. Science is whatever the corporation can make it to make another buck, or the political motivated can push their own ideology, or shall we say, the spiritual hand behind them all, the principalities of darkness, wants them to be. Oh, we'll get into that. That's not to say all science is bad or the scientific method can't be useful. What it's saying is if you take the pursuit of truth out of it, the Christian necessity for truth, then you only have the human nature. And the human nature, if it doesn't care about truth, isn't going to care about lying or fudging numbers in the lab because it gets them more money. Are you going down a direction I wasn't expecting? I apologize. Otherwise, I have more numbers too. Just line it up. You're gonna have all these people jumping in the comments. It's always so silly. No, you didn't understand. Many of those people aren't even real. A lot of them are bots. It doesn't matter. Let's get back into the word. See, with the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of knowledge, we need to, in a way, die to ourselves. Our perspectives aren't as important. Jesus, God's perspective, that's the perspective we want. And we have to figure out what that is, even through the lenses of the Hebrews, because the ancient Hebrews who wrote this, or even the Greek Septuagint and all the rest, all of that stuff, they had their flaws as well. They did not have a complete picture. Paul says we all look through a glass darkly, and he's right. Their perspectives weren't 100% right either. So we have to take a grain of salt, do our best to pursue truth, and follow Christ. So, to get into that and how this affects your everyday life, we should turn to Job, a book that if you're a new Christian, you probably haven't even tickled or sniffed. Or that was a weird one. I haven't even thought of or heard of. It is spelled like Job, but it's Job. And Job is a funny book. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest book of the Bible. And many scholars wonder if it is in fact a literary work, like a large parable. There's lots of poetry to it. And at this point, it's impossible to know. We don't know if it is just a long parable that the biblical original scholars that put the Torah together thought was worth keeping, or if it was an event that was elaborated on, or just straight up an event that was written in its totality. We don't know who wrote it, but all that doesn't matter. What matters in it is a certain event, and that, if you read Job, will show you that a certain character known as Satan is basically going throughout the earth and is almost invited and allowed into heaven, to which God interacts with him like he's just a normal subordinate and says, have you, gone throughout the earth and seen who is evil, and the Satan, as it's referred to, Satan, answers God throughout the world, and then God brings up Job and says, he's considered my servant Job, and then the Hashatan gets a little uppity and says, what about? So the confusion here is obviously, what is Satan doing in heaven? What's going on? Now, this is how these kinds of narratives will play into your life. Okay, so the whole world is in his hands, if you remember from Sunday school, if you've been in church. And if not, you have this concept of hearing, like, everything is something that God predestined and planned, a Calvinist, blah, blah, blah. And it's described in such a way that everything is just a test or a play, even. Like, what with Calvinists, it's almost just like a play. And the term is God allowed evil into the world because he needed free will. Never free will, and because apparently allowing the entire world to get corrupted on a billion sins is the only way to prove that anyone has free will, which it's not. I don't need to. I don't have to say put a tiger in a room and close the door, bar it, and make sure there's no sign of the tiger on the other side, and tell my son, don't open that door. And if he, out of curiosity, opens that door and the tiger eats him, there are easier ways to prove that my son can follow can be obedient, and that don't require the death of my son if he fails. In fact, many of us would call that a psychopathic approach, and it would be. And it would be if this is what God actually does. So this is what plays into that. So the idea here is Satan has a role to play in heaven. That the whole world is like in a court. And whenever you sin, the demons and the Satan go up to Jesus and God and say, look, he has sinned. We have a right to him now. And then they come back and blah, blah, blah. And then maybe even you preach against them in Jesus Christ's name. And they say, Christ sent us. This counts. You sinned. Right? And this is largely nonsense. Because the Shatan, in this case, is not the Satan you're thinking of. Now, a little bit back for the context here, right? You literally have certain evangelical preachers who will say things insane. I think it might have been Piper. I don't remember which one. He was a big preacher back in the day. It's not important. Like, Gen Z's not even know any of these guys' names. It's hilarious. But he said that tornadoes are God running his fingers across the land. Literally saying that, like, every girl, every mom or grandma who died in a freak tornado, right? All of destruction caused, that was planned out by God. That's bull. Okay? It's utter nonsense. Complete nonsense. And why do people take this perspective? Is because they want the whole world to be fit in this perfect box that God controls every little turn of the dialogue, every little instance, every little thought. It's comforting to them because it feels like, oh, everything's in control. Every test I face is just a test, and God will make sure that I can't be overcome by it. And it makes you feel like you're invincible, or you won't die, or you can't run into something that'll kill you, and blah, blah, blah. And yes, you might notice that they have problems with people pointing out things like tornadoes. And this is how books like Job have been twisted to push these kinds of events. This perspective that everything is almost a play set up by God to test mankind's will, and then that's why the devil has a part to play, and God controls every little bit. While the actual biblical narrative has something much more complicated, much more like a war, a messy war between good and evil, a war over the physical plane and heaven, a war that casts the devil out, and the devil is not allowed in heaven. And if he were to try to gain heaven, he would be destroyed or kicked out again. This is how these little things get there. Like, this is why they think these sorts of things are important. Is so they put these little foundations in that you don't even know are in the background of your perspective to push these ideas into the back of your head. The problem is this holds up to no scrutiny. This belief system that everything happens exactly as God wants it makes God into a psychopath, and people don't want to accept that. I don't believe these things because I don't believe God is a psychopath, and they'll try to squirm and say, "Oh, it's a test." Right? The babies who were aborted, what test were they supposed to pass exactly? What were they supposed to do? Die screaming? And again, in the perspective that this whole world, everything in it is a test, the one presiding over the test is the one at fault for anything that happens during the test. If I, as a professor of some kind, were to release a tiger in the middle of my class on any and have it eat anyone who gets a wrong answer, I would be put to jail because we, in our limited capacity as humanity, understand the concept that I'm responsible for those taking the test. And if something happens to them, by a direct action of mine, I'm the culpable party, even if they get the questions wrong. Even if they fail their test, I'm the one who released the tiger. The devil in this case. It's a bit of a problem, isn't it? But God isn't a psychopath. I know it's an amazing statement. God's not a psychopath. Now, you know that this is the case because what is it that the atheists and the nonsense people, what is always their argument? Oh, look at the kids dying of cancer. How can you say that God wanted this? And the answer is God didn't want this. The corruption of the world, the war between evil is what causes things like cancer and all that stuff. It's an easy answer. Like, the problem of evil doesn't bother you at all if you follow the Bible accordingly. If you follow the Bible accordingly, and you know some of the nuances there, it's not a problem. Even a little bit, because God has fought it every step of the way. But the rebellion on earth has distanced him from us. This is why the cross was necessary. This is why regraphing the branches, which is the terminology used in the parables and the Gospels, those other branches were us, Goyim, if you will, the Gentiles, back into the family of God so that we all share the covenant now. Right? That was the point. That was the point of it all. God has been setting up one great plan in Genesis, and it's been one big revenge plan against his children who have rebelled against him and tricked us to rebel with them. It's the devil, the angels that fell to earth to copulate with mankind. And we'll get into a little bit of that. We might save that for another sermon, explaining how that's possible. It's not as crazy as you think. Or it's crazier than you think. I don't know. It would depend on your perspective on the world. But that is important. Now you might say, "Oh, but Paul says, we passed the test, we ran the race." Yes, and he also says, "Fought the good fight." Which is it? Is it a race? Is it a fight? Or is it a test? Or is it a metaphor? A metaphor? I don't know why that came out so weird. Metaphor for the entire thing. And yes, God uses these struggles to test us, but at the same time, the world is not what he envisioned and has his will to be. His will can only ever be delayed. That's all the devil's been able to do. And it's been delayed for quite a long time. We're not in his full will yet. His full will is the kingdom of heaven over the entire earth. Everyone, every knee shall bow. You know what that means. I don't. Not everyone's going to bow willingly. I don't know how else to put that. The Revelations is very clear on that. So we're talking about a lot of things. The way atheism was able to get in, besides using a mixture of Darwinism that's been mathematically disproven at this point, look into Vox Day's stuff on that and Veraphysics, and the Enlightenment thinkers who more and more get debunked every day. After that, there was a very structural use, because now that at this point, right, what the Darwinism would have gave them was a way to say, oh, there was a way that the God didn't make anything, it's all natural, besides the starting point, which they could never get around even with the Big Bang Theory. But it made them feel sound smart, and then they could then after that they attacked. Once they had that fake pseudo logic of Darwinism, there's another path besides God creating everything mentality, then they could start attacking the morality of it. And using the Calvinist type view, the standard evangelical type view, and even in some ways the Catholic and Coptic view, who make this all about our own personal test with God and the 7 deadly sins being central and all the rest, right? That's my complaint against capitalism and Coptics on this front. Rather than that this is a cosmic war we're caught in. We're not the central focus. We're a piece on the board. God has lots of plans for us, and we are a tool that he uses, but we are, in the end, not the central focus. We became the focus because of where we were, but later sermons. Later sermons. So, we'll get into all of that. This is kind of an introduction to this. I've been kind of gingerly avoiding these topics because I wanted newer Christians not to get scared. Newer Christians don't need to hear about this right off the bat, but they do need to hear about it. Because it affects the whole way you live your life. If this is a struggle, a battle with casualties, unfortunate casualties that are unavoidable, then guess what? You fight every day. You pray every day like that prayer could mean life or death, and it very well could mean life and death. If it is like, oh, everything's just controlled like clockwork and God's just basically doing a very elaborate, deadly, violent play, then what have you need to pray other than for your own personal growth? See? And if the point over the battle is just our souls and nothing more than that, then what have you to do other than to pray over your personal souls? And all the politics and fighting over nationalities and lands isn't important. Never mind that we see throughout the Bible that the most potent spirits are the ones tied to land. That would be the principalities of darkness mentioned by Paul and the Prince of Persia in Daniel 10. Something further iterated by the fact that all of these rebellions seem to center around the earth, center around the physical plane of existence. Again, though, I'm touching on future sermons. Let's concentrate back on Job a little bit, right? So the way the atheists used this perspective against Christians was to point out, see, God's a psychopath because he allows all these things. Because he just, for his own little personal tests and free will and all this other stuff, even though free will could have been proved and tested in a much more controlled environment. We all know that. Like, it's basic logic. Right? The fall didn't need to be so catastrophic to test our free will. So, excuse me. So this allows them to wiggle in. See, there are no, you've heard the term, there's no atheists in foxholes. Well, there's no Calvinists in foxholes. Because if you actually are around real death and slaughter, real war, you can't have this perspective. You really can't. There are so many Christians who died with no real test to be seen. Diseases, slavery by Islam, plenty of martyrs who you've never heard about, martyred and nothing came from their deaths. In fact, those regions are even more tightly guarded by the devil after those martyrdoms. A lot of Asian places specifically. You can't explain every death away like that. And that's how atheism wiggled its way in. Because in the end, they had actually gotten a logical thread that people couldn't ignore, that midwits in particular couldn't ignore and hated and made them feel really smart and very atheist. Oh, yes, I'm philosophical. I look at me, take apart these dogmatists who've never actually thought about these things, right? And it inflated the intelligence. Like it wasn't as intelligent as they thought it was. All you have to do is apply a messy war to the perspective. A messy war that God will win, and his will can only be delayed in, but that there will be casualties in. And yes, this brings us back to Job. Ha Shatan. What is going on in Job? And I'll let you guys, you should read Job. Job is a really crazy book. If you're new to the faith, you can read the Spark Notes version for this case, but you should. It is a very interesting case study, a very fascinating book. But the Hashatan, the Satan here. First of all, before this, the devil is not referred to as Satan. He's referred to as the snake or the dragon, or various lizardy form. And Job is the first like Satan reference, but this isn't referencing the Satan, the big Satan with the capital S. This is a title, the accuser. This is a standard member of the council, the holy armies of God, who has a job to go out and look for sins. Later on, the devil took on the term the Satan as a nickname. And it fits him. He's the great accuser. He's the great lawyer, if you will. Right? But he is not allowed access into heaven. He's been kicked out of heaven. Right? The biggest problem with this is Jesus himself says, I watched the devil fall from heaven. I forget the exact term, but I watched him fall like a star from heaven. Right? There's several references to the devil being cast out of heaven. And it would be before this point. Right? And again, whether or not the devil had already been cast out of heaven when he tricked Eve into taking the fruit and giving it to Adam and all the rest is besides the point in this case, because they refer to the devil not as the Satan, they refer to him as the serpent. Right, this, the serpent tongue, right, the sons of the serpent and all the rest, and the crushing of the head and blah blah blah. It's not till later, like with Zechariah and later on in the New Testament, that we refer to him as the Satan. So Job first is not saying that that Satan has access to heaven. What he's saying is there was a title in the heavenly courts referred to as the accuser. This is most likely where we get the term the Satan that gets attached to the devil, the great accuser. And that clears up the whole narrative, because you have this. If you go the other way, you have to explain away when Jesus saw the devil get cast out of heaven. Did they let him back in, even though he's been rebelling the whole time, and God's just going to watch him rebel the whole time? Right? This is where you get this attached, this concept that everything's almost like a play, just a test, and everyone's watching. Right? It's not a messy war. What are you talking about, sir? No, it's a war. He's cast out of heaven. Then later on, the angels, certain group of angels rebel as well, and they copulate with mankind, and they create the giants, and they're cast out of heaven, and they are imprisoned under the earth, which is referenced in Jude. Jude, and I believe Jesus references this as well, where there's angels under the earth. Well, why wasn't the devil put there? Because that was two different rebellions. They were probably closely aligned, but they had different punishments. We see the devil's punishment is the Messiah coming and crushing his head. The punishment for those who mixed with mankind to mess up the bloodlines, they're locked under the earth, and their children essentially eat each other. Hey, good times. That is definitely sermons for another time, though. So, you see how just a simple historical glance from the perspective of the people who wrote this book makes everything make more sense. This is Heiser's theory, and honestly, the more I research into it, the more it makes sense, the more logical it is. There's absolute warfare all through the Old Testament, and it makes no sense for God to bring the devil back into heaven for any reason. It makes him either naive or uncaring of mankind's suffering. So, that's why you have to look at things through the proper perspectives, because the devil exists. The great accuser is out there. In his hand can manipulate things. Over time, they can change things, perspectives, till slowly, through little things, enlightenment, atheism, immoral activities, all the, the sexual revolution, all this stuff, just slowly, over time, till a perspective is made that the devil can take advantage of. And that is this perspective of the whole world in God's hands. Yes, God made the world, God's plans, God's wills can only be delayed, but there's going to be a lot of casualties along the way. Do not test God. Take this war seriously. And that is probably going to be a series we're going to be doing. Take the war seriously. God does. You should too. Whew. That was a little less coherent than I wanted it to be. But I hope you all who have already read Job and got confused by that whole Satan line have cleared some things up. I know I've probably angered other people who've watched this who are kind of set on these beliefs. Because you got to understand, there's deep emotional ties to this. Because accepting the idea that this isn't a clean, perfect system that God is moving together like clockwork and controlling every little aspect of is scary. Because that means we have a responsibility to fight. We have a responsibility to join our king's war, to pray and fast and to fight back physically and all the rest. And that's scary to people who don't want to fight, who don't want to take responsibility for their own actions, unfortunately. Because if your actions can shape what this part of the war looks like, if you not fighting allowed the war to go bad in this area, remember, the war will be won. God's will not be mocked. However, it can be delayed. And the more humans fail at their task, the more it gets delayed. And that's not to say there isn't salvation or the fact that we have to be perfect. No. God can work with us. God can make us into something. But your actions have responsibility more than just your own soul. It has responsibility over the larger war and over the church and over the battle here on this physical plane that eventually goes to the last battle of Armageddon and Revelation and all the rest. It all matters. So act like it. This isn't just a battle over your soul. There's a lot more going on. Now, again, this is going to have to be a series. We'll be here all day. And I apologize for jumping around. I wanted to give you kind of an intro, a little bit of a few of the pieces that gets kind of mistranslated, mislooked at, to get weird perspectives, like the idea that the devil has access to heaven and all the rest. And how these little things can mush together to create amalgamations of nonsense like Calvinism. It's just how life works. And when you have an immortal enemy that's known mankind since our conception and tricked us since our conception, you gotta expect long-term societal attacks on Christianity, which you see all the time. There's a reason why all those sci-fi stories always attacked Christianity and pushed Buddhism, for example. One was acceptable, one wasn't to them. I wonder why. Anyway, thanks for showing up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share. We will be streaming on Tuesday again. I'm hoping to get ourselves back orientated, assuming we have internet. Please be praying over our finances as always. And we may get shut off, so if the streams stop, just know it's not because I'm not here. It's because of internet troubles and money. I will be doing my best to keep the sermons up. I'll upload them at the library or something. But till our tax returns finally come in, things are going to be a little hairy. So if you wouldn't mind praying for that, that'd be great. Oh, I should have started with prayer, but we'll end with prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this message. Thank you for giving me the words to speak. Please continue to speak to everyone here and give us the wherewithal and the will to fight alongside you and to do your will here on earth, Lord, and to let your calling bring us where it will. Let your will be done and your kingdom come. In your name, amen. All right. Come back every Sunday, hopefully. Saturday's game dev will hopefully pop up tomorrow. It'll pop up either tomorrow or Wednesday, I promise you that. And I'm going to do my best to get us back on our schedule of Saturday game dev, Sunday sermon, Monday Sunday school. We'll just have to have another Tuesday Sunday school. Thank you for your patience. And as always, may God bless you as long as you follow Him. And that Jesus Christ, the blood wash over you and cleanse you of all your sins. See you in the next one.